Ayra Danny, 31 years old, from Los Angeles. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, champagne glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off velvet walls, and music loud enough to drown out every doubt I had about myself. My friends surrounded me, each one shimmering in designer outfits, faces painted in confidence. They toasted to my success, but none of them knew that behind my smile, my bank account was on its last breath. I watched as they raised their glasses. "To Ayra," said Tessa, my closest friend of 10 years. "The girl who's about to take over the fashion world." Everyone cheered. I lifted my glass too, but the sparkle in my eyes was fake. I had lost my investors that morning. My boutique, the dream I had poured my entire savings into, was on the edge of shutting down. They didn't know. Not yet. As the night went on, I excused myself to the restroom. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A message from my landlord, final notice. If the rent isn't paid by Friday, we'll have to close your shop. My fingers trembled as I read it. I leaned against the marble sink, staring at my reflection. Lipstick perfect, hair immaculate, but eyes hollow. How had I gotten here? When I walked back into the VIP lounge, the music felt louder, harsher. My friends laughed, ordered more drinks, took selfies. I slid back into my seat, trying to hold my composure. That's when Tessa leaned over, lowering her voice. "So," she said, "how's business really going?" I blinked. It's fine. A few bumps, but I'll figure it out." She smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Good, because I heard your supplier dropped you." I froze. "How did you—" "Oh, don't look so shocked," she said with a smirk. "LA's small. Word gets around." The others turned their heads, pretending not to listen, but clearly hooked. I felt heat crawl up my neck. "Tessa," I said quietly, "this isn't the place." "Oh, come on," she teased. "We're all friends here. I'm just saying, maybe you shouldn't have bragged so much when things were going good. People remember that kind of thing." Laughter rippled around the table. My chest tightened. I looked at them, every single one of them. People who had claimed to love me, support me. I had been there when they cried over breakups, when they needed money, when they felt lost. And now, when I was the one struggling, they were feeding off my humiliation. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't surrounded by friends. I was surrounded by spectators, waiting for the show of my downfall. I put down my glass. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. My voice was calm, but my heart was cracking. "I think I've had enough for tonight." "Don't be so dramatic," Tessa said, rolling her eyes. "We're just joking." "No," I interrupted. "You're just cruel." The music pulsed, but for a second I couldn't hear anything. I walked out of the lounge, my heels echoing on the floor, each step heavier than the last. Outside, the city was alive. Neon signs flickering, cars honking, strangers laughing. And there I was, standing alone under the glow of a streetlight, realizing that everything I had built, my business, my friendships, my pride, was crumbling. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The next morning, I woke up to silence. My phone didn't buzz with texts like it used to. No good morning messages from Tessa, no memes from Sam, no gossip from Layla. It was like I'd been erased overnight. I tried to brush it off. "They're just busy," I told myself. But when I opened Instagram, I saw the truth. There they were, the same people who had laughed with me last night, out at brunch, clinking glasses again. And the caption under Tessa's post hit me like a punch. "Real queens don't need fake friends." The comment section was full of laughing emojis and inside jokes. I scrolled through them, my stomach twisting. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Everyone knew. I threw my phone on the bed and sat there staring at the wall. How could people turn so fast? How could loyalty disappear overnight? When my mother called that afternoon, I tried to sound normal. "I'm fine, Mom, just busy," but she heard it in my voice. "Ayra," she said softly, "you've always been the kind of person who gives everything to others. But sometimes, you have to learn who deserves it." Her words stayed with me long after I hung up. That week, things got worse. My boutique lease expired. My landlord changed the locks. My suppliers stopped answering. I even caught one of my old employees working for Tessa, the same friend who had once begged me for a job. When she was struggling, I realized then that failure doesn't just show you who your enemies are, it shows you who your real friends never were. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting on a park bench with a cup of instant coffee, watching strangers walk their dogs. I didn't have my boutique anymore. I didn't have my friends. But what I did have, for the first time in years, was clarity. All my life, I'd been chasing approval. I wanted to belong, to impress, to prove I was someone. I dressed for others, lived for others, even dreamed for others. But sitting there in that silence, I realized the only person I truly needed to prove anything to was me. I looked at my reflection in the coffee cup's rippled surface. No makeup, no smile, no mask. Just Ayra. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start again. I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and whispered to myself, they left when I was broke. But one day, they'll wish they hadn't. And that was the moment the seed of my revenge, quiet, patient, unstoppable, began to take root. The days after that night stretched endlessly, like a movie scene stuck on repeat. Every time I scrolled through social media, I saw my so-called friends posting their perfect lives. Parties, brunches, vacations, always together, always smiling. It wasn't the photos that hurt. It was the silence between them. The silence where my name used to be. I didn't realize how quickly people could erase you until it happened to me. I spent most mornings sitting at the small cafe across from where my boutique used to be. The for lease sign mocked me from across the street, taped crookedly to the window. My dreams were still inside that building. Sketches, unfinished dresses, mannequins draped in half-sewn fabric. It was strange how something you built with your hands could vanish overnight, leaving only a reflection of who you were. Every time someone walked past, I half expected them to look at me with sympathy. But they didn't even notice me. I wasn't Ayra the designer anymore. I was invisible. One morning, as I sat staring at my untouched coffee, I heard laughter. Familiar laughter. I turned. There they were, Tessa and Layla, stepping out of a sleek black car, arm in arm, designer handbags glittering in the sunlight. They looked radiant, successful, untouched by the world's cruelty. Is that Ayra? I heard Layla whisper. Tessa tilted her sunglasses down. Oh my God, it is. Sitting there like a ghost. They laughed softly, and before I could even decide whether to wave or look away, they were already crossing the street, deliberately turning the other direction. My throat tightened. I should have looked away. I should have pretended not to see them, but instead, I sat there frozen, watching the people I had once called family walk past me as if I were a stranger. Later that afternoon, I went home to my tiny apartment, walls covered in unpaid bills and old mood boards. I turned on the light, and it flickered once before going out completely. Perfect. I sank onto my bed and whispered to the empty room, "Why did you leave me?" No one answered, of course, but the truth lingered in the air. They hadn't left because I failed. They left because I stopped being useful. I had been their constant, the one who helped pay rent when Layla lost her job, the one who bought Tessa's birthday dinner when she forgot her wallet, the one who designed free outfits for every one of them when they wanted to stand out at events. And when I had nothing left to give, they had no reason to stay. A week later, I ran into John, an old friend from college. He was standing in line at a food truck near downtown, his hair messier, his eyes kind as ever. "Ayra?" he said, blinking in surprise. "Wow, it's been years." I smiled weakly. "Yeah, a long time." We talked. Small talk at first, then real talk. He'd heard about my boutique closing, but unlike everyone else, he didn't pity me. He just listened. "You know," he said, handing me a coffee, "you were always the one everyone wanted to be around. Not because you had things, but because you had drive. Don't lose that." It was such a simple thing to say, but it hit me harder than anything anyone had told me in months. That night, I sat on my floor, surrounded by fabric scraps. My hands itched for a needle and thread. I found my old sewing kit, the one I'd used back when I couldn't afford machines. As I stitched, something inside me came back to life. The sound of the needle moving through fabric was like a heartbeat. Familiar, steady, mine. Maybe I'd lost my boutique, my friends, my place in the world, but I hadn't lost myself. The next morning I got an idea, small, maybe even foolish. I decided to sell custom pieces online. No fancy store, no staff. Just me, my designs, and a camera. I spent the entire day photographing my old samples and uploading them to a basic website I built for free. I named it Restitch, a nod to what I was trying to do, sew my life back together. The first week I got 2 orders. Then 1 cancellation. Then silence. But on the 12th day, a message popped up in my inbox. Your work is beautiful. I can feel the emotion in every piece. I want to commission you for a line. It was signed by a name I didn't recognize. Mara Kinsley. I looked her up. She was a small influencer, nothing massive, but she had a loyal following. I accepted immediately. The next few weeks were a blur. I barely slept, stitching through the night, using every bit of fabric I had left. My apartment looked like chaos, but it felt like purpose again. When Mara finally posted her first photo wearing my design, a sleek crimson dress with hand-sewn gold detailing, the post exploded. Within hours, people were asking, "Where did you get that?" By the next morning, my inbox was flooded. Orders, collaborations, offers. It wasn't fame. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something real, and then the inevitable happened. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I hadn't seen in months. Tessa. Hey girl, saw your designs on Insta. You're killing it. Let's catch up soon? I stared at the screen. For a long time, I didn't move. A part of me wanted to ignore her. Another part of me wanted to scream. But the strongest part, the one that had been quietly rebuilding, just smiled. Not yet, I thought. Let her wait. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need her validation. I didn't need anyone's. I looked around my apartment at the sewing table, the fabric, the growing orders. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I whispered something that felt like truth. They'll come back, and when they do, they won't recognize who I've become. It's strange how you can feel both numb and furious at the same time. Like your heart has been drained, but your mind keeps replaying the same wound over and over again. That was me, for weeks after Tessa's message. I thought ignoring her would give me peace. But peace doesn't come easily when you've been broken in public. The betrayal didn't just sting. It rewired something inside me. I wasn't the same girl who begged for loyalty anymore. I had become quiet, watchful, and dangerous. The orders for Restitch grew, slowly but steadily. Each sale felt like a small victory. One person who believed in me when my old circle didn't. I worked nights, slept mornings, and lived off coffee and adrenaline. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, but deep down I knew. This wasn't just about rebuilding. It was about revenge, and it started the day I saw Tessa's face on a billboard. Luma Luxe, new luxury brand, launching soon, by Tessa Lee. I froze in the middle of Sunset Boulevard. The traffic horn blaring behind me, I stared up at her image. Glossy hair, sharp smile, and a slogan that read, "Real queens create their own thrones." My jaw clenched. Because that was my line, my brand philosophy. I had used that exact quote in my old boutique's press release 2 years ago. She had stolen my words. My aesthetic, my identity. I spent the next few hours digging online. Her brand's social media had exploded overnight. 50,000 followers, sponsorships, influencers tagging her designs. But as I scrolled through the pictures, something clicked. I knew those dresses. Every cut, every pattern, every detail. They weren't just inspired by me. They were mine. She had taken my old designs, sketches I had shown her once when she was helping me prep for a runway event, and rebranded them as her own. The betrayal that night at the club had been personal. But this was war. I didn't cry this time. I didn't scream. I sat down at my sewing table, heart thudding like a war drum, and whispered to myself, "Okay, you want a throne? Let's see how high you can sit when the floor disappears beneath you." I pulled out my laptop and opened every folder I had. Old drafts, invoices, text messages, screenshots. There it was, a PDF time-stamped from 2 years ago, containing every original sketch she had stolen. Proof. But revenge wasn't about posting it online. That would be too easy and too small. I wanted her to feel what I felt, to watch everything she built crumble, piece by piece, just like mine had. A week later, I attended her brand's launch party. No one expected to see me there, especially not her. The event was glamorous, held in a rooftop venue overlooking the city. Flashbulbs flickered, champagne flowed, and Tessa basked in the attention like a queen who'd finally claimed her crown. When our eyes met across the room, she faltered. "Ayra?" she said when I approached. Her smile wavered. "Wow, it's been forever." "Has it?" I asked, tilting my head. "Seems like yesterday we were sitting in my studio, you watching me sketch designs while pretending to help." Her face flushed. "I don't know what you're implying." "Oh, I think you do." Before she could respond, a photographer interrupted, calling her name. She turned away, laughing nervously, pretending everything was fine. But I saw the panic in her eyes. She knew that I knew. That night I went home and sent an email, not to her, to one of the biggest fashion magazines in LA, Trendset Weekly. "Hello. I have proof that Luma Lux's latest collection contains multiple design infringements from my original boutique, Ayra Designs. Attached are timestamps, original files, and witnesses who can verify authorship." I hit send. Then I waited. 2 days later, the first article dropped. Luma Lux under fire. Designer accused of stealing sketches from former friend. The fashion world loves a scandal more than a success story. The news spread like wildfire. By evening, every influencer who had worn her brand was deleting their posts. Her sponsors pulled out, her comments filled with accusations. And while she scrambled to defend herself, I stayed silent. For the first time in years, I didn't need to explain myself. The truth was loud enough, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was heavy, complicated. Watching her crumble didn't bring me joy. It brought me clarity, because revenge, I realized, doesn't heal you. It only stops the bleeding long enough for you to see the scar. Still, I wasn't done. A few nights later, she called me. Her voice trembled through the speaker. "Ayra, please, they're destroying me. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said quietly. "You took what was mine. You laughed when I fell. And now you want mercy?" She sniffled. "I didn't mean to." "Don't lie to me, Tessa. You did it because you thought I'd never rise again. But here's the thing. You can steal my designs, my friends, my spotlight, but you'll never steal my name." I hung up before she could answer. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights. I felt empty, not victorious, not broken, just still. John texted me later, heard about the news. "You okay?" I stared at the screen before typing back. "I should be, but I'm not sure winning feels the way I thought it would." He replied, "That's because real victories aren't about destroying someone else. They're about finding yourself again." His words lingered in my chest like an echo. The next morning, when I checked my website, sales had tripled overnight. People were rallying behind me, calling me the real artist, the comeback queen. It should have felt amazing. And in a way it did. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of who I was meant to become. Because from that day forward, my designs weren't just clothes. They were statements, stitched with every ounce of pain, betrayal, and resilience I had left. And this time, no one was taking them from me again. After the article broke, everything changed, but not in the way I'd imagined. My name was suddenly everywhere. Blogs, fashion boards, even gossip pages. Designer Ayra Danny exposes fake friend, read one headline. "Luma Lux collapse rocks LA fashion scene," screamed another. For the first time in years, I was back in the spotlight. But it wasn't because of my art. It was because of the drama, and drama fades fast. At first, people cheered for me. Then as the weeks passed, the applause turned into whispers. She's too emotional. She's milking it. Maybe she's lying. The internet has no loyalty. It builds you up to tear you down again. One morning, I woke to a new wave of hate comments. Someone had leaked a rumor that I'd faked the designs just to ruin Tessa's brand. She had her PR team working overtime, painting herself as a victim. "She's obsessed with me," Tessa said in one interview clip that went viral. "I wish her healing, but I won't engage in negativity." My stomach turned as I watched. The woman who had stolen from me was now playing the saint. I stopped going out. My phone stayed face down most days. Orders slowed again. The buzz I'd built around Restitch was fading under the noise of scandal. Even Mara, the influencer who had supported me early on, stopped replying to my messages. There's a certain silence that creeps into your life when people stop believing in you. It's heavier than loneliness. It's erasure. I'd wake up and stare at the ceiling for hours thinking, what if this is it? What if this is all I'll ever be? The girl who got betrayed. One evening, there was a knock on my door. I hesitated before opening it. John stood there, holding 2 takeout boxes and a small smile. "You look like you haven't eaten in days," he said. I tried to laugh. "Guess I've been busy surviving." He walked in without waiting for permission, setting the food down on the counter. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." "I do," I said. "No one else will fight for me." He looked at me for a long moment. "That's not fighting, Ayra. That's isolating yourself." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. We ate quietly, sitting on the floor among fabric scraps and unopened mail. At one point he asked, "When's the last time you designed something just for you?" I blinked. "For me? Yeah, not for clients. Not for revenge. For you." I didn't have an answer. That night, after he left, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my sewing table again, running my fingers over the threads. Designing had once been my joy, my escape. Somewhere along the way, it had become a weapon. I pulled out an old roll of fabric, one I'd been saving for years. It was soft, ivory silk with faint gold shimmer, the kind of fabric you don't use unless it means something. I didn't plan or sketch. I just created. Hours passed. The city went quiet outside. By dawn, the first rays of sunlight spilled through my window, hitting the finished dress on the mannequin. It wasn't flashy or trendy. It was simple, strong, and pure, like I wanted to be. For the first time in months, I smiled. Maybe I wasn't ruined. Maybe I was just being remade. But rebuilding yourself isn't easy when the world keeps reminding you of who you used to be. I ran into Layla a week later at a downtown market. She looked uncomfortable, clutching her iced latte like it could shield her. "Ayra," she said cautiously. "You look..." "Good," I nodded. "You too." There was an awkward pause. "Listen," she said finally. "I just wanted to say, I didn't know Tessa was stealing your work." "I swear I didn't. I thought she was talented." I finished for her. Layla's face reddened. "I just didn't want to get involved. You know how messy things get in this city." "Yeah," I said coldly. "I know." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I looked her in the eye. "No, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught watching it happen." She didn't respond, just lowered her gaze and walked away. And as I watched her disappear into the crowd, I realized something that hurt and healed me all at once. Sometimes closure doesn't come from apologies. It comes from realizing you don't need them anymore. The next month was slow but steady. I started attending local art markets again, selling pieces by hand. I didn't make much, but I made enough. Each sale came with a conversation, a real connection. People would look me in the eyes and say, "This feels different. I can tell you love what you do." And I did. I had found something beyond the noise, purpose, still. There were nights I'd scroll through Tessa's now defunct pages, seeing the chaos I'd unleashed, lawsuits, scandals. Her name, once golden, now tainted. And I'd wonder if she hated me as much as I once hated her. Maybe she did. Maybe she deserved to. But the truth? I didn't hate her anymore. I pitied her. Because while she had built her empire on lies, I was building mine on ashes, and somehow it was stronger. One rainy evening, I stood by my window again, holding a cup of tea, watching the lights shimmer on wet streets. My reflection looked different now, calmer, grounded. I thought back to the night in that rooftop lounge when they laughed at me. The night I walked out with nothing. Now I had less money than I did back then. Fewer friends, but I had something I'd never had before. Peace. I whispered into the quiet. You can lose everything, but as long as you don't lose yourself, you're still whole. And for the first time since it all began, I meant it. The storm always passes, they say, but no one ever talks about the silence that follows. The kind that hums inside your chest, daring you to fill it with something new. That's where I found myself. Standing in the middle of my small studio apartment, surrounded by fabric and thread, my hands trembling not from weakness anymore, but from awakening. Everything I'd lost had stripped me down to the bone. And from that emptiness, something sharp and powerful began to grow. It started with a single email. Subject line: partnership opportunity. I almost deleted it. I'd been getting dozens of spammy offers since the scandal. But something about the name caught my attention. Harper & Vale Productions, a small creative agency known for building indie designers into recognizable names. The message was simple. We've been following your work on Restitch and love your storytelling approach. We'd like to discuss featuring you in our upcoming documentary series on women rebuilding after loss. I blinked, reading it 3 times. Then I laughed. Out loud, of course. The universe was giving me a stage, not to explain myself, but to define myself. 2 weeks later, I met with the producers in a small coffeehouse downtown. They were warm, enthusiastic, genuine. A far cry from the shark-like PR people I'd met during my boutique days. We're not looking for perfection, one of them said. We want honesty. We want your truth, the real story behind the woman who rebuilt from nothing. For the first time in years, someone wanted to hear my voice and not just see my designs. I signed the contract that same day. Filming began the next month. They followed me everywhere, to markets, fittings, fabric stores. At first it felt invasive, but then it became cathartic. Speaking my truth on camera wasn't painful. It was freeing. One afternoon, they asked me to walk them through my old boutique building, the one I'd lost. I hesitated, but something in me said, go. As I stood before that empty storefront, the for lease sign still hanging crooked, I felt an ache, but not regret. Growth. This was my dream, I said to the camera. But sometimes dreams burn down so we can see the fire that lives inside us. When I said it, I realized it wasn't just for the show. It was for me. That night, I got another message, this time from Tessa. I saw the teaser for your documentary. Congratulations, I guess. You're really milking your 15 minutes, huh? I stared at the screen. The old me would have deleted it or cried. The new me? Smiled, I typed back, don't worry, you'll get your 15 minutes too. Just not the kind you're hoping for. And I wasn't bluffing. Because what Tessa didn't know was that the documentary wasn't just about my comeback, it was about accountability. Harper & Vale had done their research. They'd found the paper trail linking her stolen designs to my original work. They even found ex-employees willing to speak anonymously about her lies. I didn't have to say her name on camera. The truth would say it for me, but I didn't want revenge anymore. Not in the same way. I wanted something deeper. Respect. In the weeks leading up to the premiere, I poured everything I had into one final collection. The fabric shimmered under my hands like old memories finally learning to dance again. Each dress told a story of loss, betrayal, survival, and rebirth. I called it the Phoenix line. The centerpiece was the ivory and gold dress I'd sewn for myself that night after John's visit. I adjusted its seams, refined its details, and decided I'd wear it to the premiere. My armor, my closure. When the documentary finally released, I expected a modest reaction, but I underestimated the power of authenticity. The trailer went viral within hours. Viewers were captivated not just by my story, but by the rawness of it, The message that you could lose everything and still rise. I watched comments pour in. Her story gave me courage to leave my toxic job. She turned pain into art. This is what strength looks like. And then the message that made me freeze. You don't know me, but your design saved my life. I wore one of your pieces to my divorce hearing. It made me feel strong again. I sat there crying quietly, not from sadness, but from the realization that my pain had found purpose. But the real moment of power came a week later at a charity gala hosted by Harper & Vale. The event was packed with industry names, editors, designers, investors, all mingling, glasses clinking. I stood near the entrance wearing the phoenix gown, when the crowd suddenly parted. Tessa had arrived. She looked like a ghost of her former self. Thinner, tired, eyes darting nervously. The whispers started instantly. She saw me. Our eyes met. She froze. Ayra, she said softly, almost pleading. Can we talk? I nodded once. We stepped aside to a quieter corner. I know you hate me, she began, her voice shaking. But I never meant for it to go this far. Please, just help me fix this. I'm losing everything. I studied her. For the first time, I didn't see a villain. I saw a woman terrified of the monster she'd become. You already lost everything, I said quietly. The moment you decided to betray someone who would have given you the world. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. I turned to leave, then paused. But thank you, I said. She frowned. For what? For reminding me who I never want to become. That night, as I walked out onto the balcony overlooking the glittering skyline, I realized something profound. Power wasn't about control or revenge. It was about grace, the kind that makes you smile at the people who once broke you, knowing they can't touch you anymore. I felt the weight of everything I'd endured, and the strange lightness that came with letting go. I whispered to the city lights. This is just the beginning, and deep down, I knew it was. When people think of revenge, they picture explosions, dramatic, instant, loud. But real revenge? It's quiet. It's patient. It's built thread by thread until one day, it's a masterpiece only you understand. That's what I spent the next 6 months creating. After the documentary's success, Restitch wasn't just a local name anymore. Orders began pouring in from out of state. A boutique in Chicago wanted to carry my designs, and a popular fashion blog named me the designer who rose from ashes. But what no one knew, not the media, not my followers, not even John, was that every step I took next was part of something much bigger. Something that had started forming the moment I saw Tessa's fear at that gala. This wasn't about hurting her anymore. It was about reclaiming everything she tried to take from me, and proving that my rise would come from the very stage she thought she owned. My first move was simple: expansion. I reached out to small designers, women like me, who had been overlooked, dismissed, or burned by bigger names. Let's collaborate, I told them. Let's create a platform where real talent shines, no favoritism, no theft. We called it the Rebirth Collective. Within weeks, my studio buzzed with energy again. Fabric rolls lined the walls, machines hummed, laughter filled the air. We were small, but we were fierce, and I made sure every contract we signed was airtight. Every design time-stamped, copyrighted, registered. I wasn't leaving any door open for another Tessa. Meanwhile, word spread fast that Tessa's company was crumbling. Lawsuits, debt, and unpaid suppliers. Still, she clung to relevance, hosting charity luncheons, posting motivational quotes, pretending nothing was wrong. I watched from afar, calm and focused. Then one day I saw a post that made me pause. Luma Lux is back. It read, "Rebranding under new direction. Grand reopening in 3 months." I laughed softly. Of course she would try to resurrect herself, but this time I'd be ready. I called John that evening. "She's planning a relaunch," I said. He frowned. "I'm not thinking of revenge," I interrupted. "I'm thinking of strategy," he sighed. "Ayra, I know," I said quietly. "But this isn't about her. It's about me closing the circle." He looked at me for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's make sure she never forgets your name." For weeks I buried myself in work. My designs evolved. bolder, more confident, unapologetically me. I was no longer chasing validation. I was building an empire rooted in authenticity. When my team showed me early concepts for our next campaign, I smiled. It was perfect, raw, elegant, defiant. The tagline read, "They buried us, but they forgot we were seeds." Then came the invitation that sealed fate. A fashion magazine, the same one that once ignored me, reached out. They were covering the rebirth of women in design and wanted to feature both me and Tessa on a joint panel discussion. 2 women. One stage, one past, it was poetic. The day of the event arrived. The air buzzed with whispers and camera flashes as I walked in, wearing one of my phoenix gowns, red silk that flowed like flame. I could feel every gaze on me, curious, cautious, awed. Tessa arrived minutes later, dressed in icy blue, smiling too wide. But her eyes, those told the truth. She was terrified. We took our seats beside each other, microphones clipped on. The moderator introduced us with practiced enthusiasm. "Tonight," she began, "we celebrate 2 women who've faced adversity in fashion and emerged stronger." I almost laughed. Tessa spoke first, her tone polished, her words rehearsed. "We all make mistakes," she said smoothly. "But what defines us is how we move forward." When it was my turn, I looked out at the crowd and took a breath. "For years," I began, "I thought success meant proving people wrong. But real success," I glanced at her, "is when you no longer need to." The room went silent. Cameras flashed. Tessa's smile faltered. "I learned," I continued, "that taking from others will never fill what's empty inside. True art, true beauty, it comes from truth. And truth always finds its way to the surface." Applause erupted, and in that moment, I didn't just speak to her. I spoke to every version of me that had ever been silenced. After the event, journalists swarmed me. "What's next for Restitch? How does it feel to inspire so many?" I smiled, answering gracefully. But when I turned, Tessa stood alone near the exit. Her eyes met mine. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "You win." I shook my head gently. "No, Tessa, I didn't need to." The next day, an article went viral. "The Queen Returns: How Ayra Danny Redefined Revenge as Redemption." Brands reached out for collaborations, and speaking offers flooded my inbox. But more importantly, I started getting letters from women, strangers, thanking me for standing up, for turning pain into power. That's when I realized my setup had never been about Tessa at all. It had been about reclaiming the narrative, about showing the world that you can fall, break, and still rise higher than before. Months later, I visited the ocean, the one place I'd always gone to think. The waves roared against the shore, the air tasting like salt and new beginnings. I closed my eyes and whispered, "It's done." The revenge was complete, not because I destroyed her, but because I built myself. And the woman staring back from the water's reflection. She wasn't angry anymore. She was free. Revenge isn't always about fire. Sometimes it's about the light, the kind that exposes everything hiding in the dark. That's what this moment felt like. The calm before illumination. 3 weeks after the panel, the Rebirth Collective was officially launching its first independent fashion showcase. We'd secured a partnership with Harper & Vale again, but this time, the event was ours. No middlemen, no filters, just creators owning their craft. The show was titled Ashes to Empire. Fitting, right? It was scheduled for the same weekend as Tessa's relaunch party. I hadn't planned that coincidence, but fate clearly had a sense of humor. The night before the event, I walked through the nearly finished exhibition space. Rows of mannequins stood like silent witnesses, draped in gowns that shimmered under the overhead lights. Each design represented a chapter of my journey: loss, pain, resilience, rebirth. My assistant, Lila, walked beside me. "Do you think she'll show up?" she asked carefully. I didn't need to ask who she was. "She might," I said, smoothing the hem of one dress. "But that's not why we're here," Lila smiled. Still, wouldn't that be poetic? I allowed myself a small laugh. Maybe a little. By morning, the venue buzzed with cameras, journalists, and industry veterans. The energy was electric. Everyone curious to see if Ayra Danny could deliver again, this time on her own terms. I stood backstage, adjusting a model's shoulder strap when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You really don't stop, do you?" T.I. smiled faintly. She was watching. Good. The showcase began. Soft music filled the room as the lights dimmed, and one by one, the models stepped out. The designs flowed like living poetry, a story unfolding across silk and lace. The audience was silent, mesmerized. Each outfit carried a whisper of what I had endured. Betrayal stitched into beauty, grief turned into gold. When the final model appeared, wearing the phoenix gown, I stepped onto the runway beside her. Applause erupted, thunderous, unstoppable. It wasn't just admiration, it was validation. I felt tears burn behind my eyes but refused to let them fall. Instead, I smiled and said into the mic, "This is for every woman who was ever told she couldn't rise again." We did. The crowd roared. Afterward, as the event wound down, I walked out onto the terrace to breathe. The city glittered below. Endless lights, endless stories. That's when I heard a voice behind me. I have to admit, "You did it." I turned. Tessa stood there, wearing sunglasses though the night had long fallen. Her presence was almost ghostly. "I didn't invite you," I said calmly. She shrugged. "Didn't need an invitation. The whole world's talking about you anyway." "Then why are you here?" Her lips trembled slightly before she spoke. "Because I wanted to see for myself, to see how far you'd go to ruin me." I tilted my head. "You ruined yourself," she looked away. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said softly. "It makes me free." She stepped closer, her voice shaking. "You had everything once, and you threw it away because of your pride. We could have been unstoppable together." I met her eyes. "You stole from me, Tessa. You lied. You took my dreams and called them yours. That wasn't partnership. That was betrayal." Her expression faltered, then hardened again. "So what now? You got your revenge. Are you happy?" I took a breath, letting the silence stretch. "No," I said finally. "I'm not happy because of your downfall. I'm happy because I don't need your approval anymore." For the first time, she didn't have a response. She just stood there, her shoulders sinking as if the weight of her choices finally caught up to her. "You know," I added, stepping closer, "when I started this, I wanted you to feel my pain. But now, I just want peace. You can keep your bitterness. I'll keep my success." And with that, I walked away. The click of my heels echoing like punctuation to a story long overdue. The next morning, headlines filled every feed. Ayra Danny redefines. Modern fashion, a triumph of authenticity. From betrayal to brilliance, the designer who changed the game. Tessa Vale's brand misses its grand relaunch. Amid legal trouble, poetic, wasn't it? My team celebrated, champagne popping in the studio, but I didn't feel the need to brag or post. The victory was internal, deep, quiet. That's what true power feels like. Steady, not loud. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected call. It was from a major Paris-based fashion house. They wanted to collaborate with me for their spring line. It felt surreal. The same city I once dreamed of, the same runways that once felt out of reach. Now, they were calling me. I hung up, sat in silence for a moment, and smiled. I'd done it, not because of revenge, because I rebuilt myself. But the universe wasn't quite done yet. At the next Rebirth Collective meeting, one of my assistants brought me a package. "This came for you," she said. No return address. Inside was a small envelope. No letter, just a folded sketch, a dress design, my design. The one Tessa had stolen years ago, drawn in her hand. But this time, signed at the bottom with a simple note. "I'm sorry. For a long time, I just stared at it." Then I placed it in my drawer, not as a trophy, not as a reminder of hate, but as a testament. That people can change. That closure doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, It's in quiet acknowledgments. Later that evening, I stood in front of my mirror, wearing a new creation. Sleek black with gold accents, strong but graceful. My reflection didn't look angry anymore. She looked unstoppable. I whispered, "You were right, Ayra. You didn't just rebuild. You rose." Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars fallen to earth. And somewhere in that endless glow, I knew the story was finally complete. Fame feels different when it's earned. It doesn't roar in your ears. It hums beneath your skin, steady and warm. That's how it felt in the weeks after my showcase. Everything that once felt impossible suddenly seemed within reach. My designs were in demand, my story was everywhere, and the Rebirth Collective was becoming a movement. But with recognition came curiosity. And truth has a way of finding the spotlight when the world starts watching. The morning the reckoning began. I was sitting in my studio with Lila, going over sketches for our spring collection. The sunlight poured in through the wide windows, soft and golden. It was peaceful, until my phone started buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it was just another wave of congratulations. But when I saw the notification banner, my heart paused. Tessa Vale Exposed was trending. "Lila," I said slowly, "turn on the news." The studio fell silent as the TV flickered to life. Breaking story tonight. Shocking revelations about former designer Tessa Vale and allegations of plagiarism, fraud, and intellectual theft. Sources say multiple artists have come forward claiming she stole their work, including one rising designer, Ayra Danny, whose story recently captivated audiences. They played clips from my documentary, my interviews, the panel. The evidence was overwhelming. Timestamps, design proofs, old emails, and I hadn't released a single piece of it myself. Someone else had done it. The truth had finally turned on its own lights. That night, my inbox filled with messages. Some were from reporters, others from strangers thanking me for being honest when the industry wasn't. But one message stood out. It was from Tessa. "You got what you wanted. I hope you're proud." I stared at it for a long time. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just exhaustion. Because revenge doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels quiet, like the final note in a song that's been playing too long. I didn't respond. The following week, Harper and Vale invited me to speak at a televised industry roundtable. "We want to talk about reform," they said. "Ethics, credit, creative justice. You're the voice people trust." So, I said yes. The event took place in a sleek studio. Cameras everywhere, journalists in the front row. My palms were sweating as I took my seat on stage. Across from me sat editors, CEOs, artists, the same people who once dismissed me. When the moderator introduced me, she said, "Ayra Danny isn't just a designer. She's a symbol of resilience in an industry built on reinvention." I smiled, took a breath, and leaned into the microphone. "I used to believe the fashion world was built on beauty," I said. "But beauty means nothing without integrity. For too long, we've looked the other way while talent gets stolen and voices get silenced." "That ends now," applause erupted. Cameras flashed. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just speaking for myself anymore. Later that evening, as I walked off stage, a journalist stopped me. "Ayra, how does it feel to finally get justice?" I paused, thinking carefully. "It's not about justice," I said softly. "It's about truth. Justice fades, but truth rewrites everything." He nodded slowly, almost reverently, and just like that, I realized I had become the story I once feared. The cautionary tale turned inspiration. Over the next few weeks, the industry began shifting. New policies were drafted to protect independent creators. Platforms started verifying design copyrights. My name became attached to those changes, not as a victim, but as a catalyst. Fashion schools invited me to lecture. Magazines quoted me in think pieces. A once broken designer had become a voice of reform. Sometimes, when I walked into a room, I could feel the respect. Not the empty applause of status, but the silent nods of people who finally saw me. But not everything was easy. The truth also took a toll. A part of me still thought about Tessa. Not the rival, but the woman who'd once been my friend. Every so often, I'd see her name mentioned in a headline or a thread, each time smaller, each time sadder. Until one day, she disappeared completely. No company. No interviews, just silence. I told myself it wasn't my burden anymore, but deep down, I knew a piece of me still mourned what we could have been. The team we once were. Before ambition turned toxic. Months later, Harper & Vale hosted an exclusive awards gala to honor women reshaping the creative world. I wasn't expecting anything. Just being invited felt like closure enough. But when they called my name for the Integrity in Design Award, I froze. The crowd rose in applause as I walked to the stage. Flashes of my journey flooded my mind. The betrayal, the collapse, the nights spent crying over ruined sketches, and then the rebuilding, the strength, the rebirth. I accepted the trophy, sleek, silver, heavy in my hands, and said quietly, "This doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every woman who chose honesty over shortcuts, passion over fear, truth over silence." The applause grew louder, but what stayed with me most wasn't the noise. It was the stillness that followed, the peace in my chest. After the event, I slipped out to the balcony, the city lights shimmering like falling stars. John found me there, smiling. "You did it," he said softly. I shook my head. "We did it. Everyone who ever believed in something real did it." He wrapped an arm around me, his warmth grounding me in the night. "So what now?" he asked. I looked out at the skyline. "Now I live. I create, not to prove anything, just to be free." He smiled. "Sounds perfect." The next morning, the front page of Vogue read, "Ayra Danny, the woman who made the industry look in the mirror." And beneath it, a quote from my speech. "The truest form of revenge isn't destruction. It's evolution." That evening, I returned to my studio, now quiet after months of chaos. I lit a candle, sat by the window, and opened my sketchbook. Fresh pages. "Fresh beginnings," I whispered. "Thank you, universe." And let the pencil glide across the paper, not sketching anger or pain, but joy, because the reckoning was done. The world had seen the truth, and I was finally free to create without ghosts at my back. The storm had passed, but I was still learning how to breathe again. When you've lived through betrayal, success doesn't always taste sweet right away. It's strange. People see your victories, but they never see the quiet after. The part where you sit alone, staring at what's left of yourself, trying to figure out who you are now that the fight is over. That's where I was. It had been nearly 6 months since the public reckoning, and life had taken on a rhythm again. My days were filled with work, interviews, travel, yet in the spaces between, in the still moments, I felt a gentle ache. Not sadness exactly, more like the echo of something that had finally stopped hurting. One evening, I found myself back in the studio, surrounded by sketches, the faint hum of the sewing machine in the background. I looked around, the walls lined with designs, the air filled with fabric dust and dreams, and realized how far I'd come. This space used to be my hiding place, the one corner of the world where I felt safe after everything collapsed. Now it was my empire. Still, a thought lingered. What now? My phone buzzed. A message from John. "You've been quiet." "You okay?" I smiled. He knew me too well. "Just thinking," I replied. "Dangerous habit for you," he texted back, followed by a winking emoji. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Some things never changed," he called moments later. "You need to get out of that studio," he said. "You've been working nonstop since the gala." "I like it here," I said. "It's home," he paused. "Home should be more than 4 walls and a sewing machine, Ayra." I didn't respond right away. Because he was right. I had built something incredible, but I hadn't lived it yet. I'd been so focused on survival, on proving myself, that I'd forgotten what peace looked like. "Let's fix that," he said, breaking the silence. "You're coming with me this weekend. No work. Just air, food, and laughter." That weekend we drove to the coast, the same ocean where I'd once whispered, "It's done." Only this time I wasn't seeking closure. I was there to feel alive. The air was warm, the waves wild. I kicked off my sandals and walked into the water, letting it curl around my ankles. The horizon stretched endlessly, soft blues fading into gold. John walked beside me, quiet for a while before saying, "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were made of glass. Beautiful but fragile." I turned to him, eyebrows raised. "That's not very flattering," he chuckled. "Wait for it. What I've learned is, you're not glass. You're fire. You bend, you burn, but you never break." For once, I didn't deflect with humor. I just smiled. "Maybe," I said softly. "But even fire needs to rest," he nodded. "Then let's rest." We spent the next 2 days just being, hiking, laughing, sharing stories of who we were before the chaos. It reminded me of the version of myself I'd buried under ambition and revenge. And for the first time, I realized something crucial. The story wasn't about Tessa anymore. It was about me, about the woman I became in the aftermath. The revenge was complete. The healing was just beginning. Back in New York, I decided to take a short break from public appearances. I focused on mentoring younger designers, helping them navigate the industry's pitfalls. One of them, a bright-eyed girl named Suri, asked me one day, "Miss Danny, how do you stay kind in a world that isn't?" I smiled. "You don't stay kind because the world is kind," I said. "You stay kind in spite of it," she nodded, her expression thoughtful. And in her, I saw a reflection of who I once was, naive, hungry, hopeful. It felt good to pass on what I'd learned without bitterness. Weeks later, I received an email that made me pause. It was from Tessa. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to tell you, I'm rebuilding too. Not a brand, not fame, myself. I'm working at a small studio now, teaching kids how to design. Thank you for forcing me to see what I'd become. I hope one day you'll forgive me." I read it twice, then a third time. For years, I thought forgiveness meant letting someone off the hook. Now I understood it differently. It wasn't for her. It was for me. I didn't reply. But I whispered to the quiet room, "I already did." The following month, the Rebirth Collective expanded internationally. Our designs were showcased in Milan, Paris, and Tokyo. Yet amid all the glamour, I stayed grounded. My success wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or betrayed. In every interview, I said the same thing. Resilience is our greatest revenge, and I meant it. One night, after a long day, I stood in front of my mirror again. The same mirror I'd faced countless times through every season of my life. When I was broken, when I was angry, when I was afraid. Now, my reflection looked calm, whole. "I made it," I whispered. Not with arrogance, not with pride, but with quiet gratitude. The room felt warm, alive with the hum of the city outside. I thought about my journey, every heartbreak, every loss, every betrayal, and realized I wouldn't change a single moment, because each one built the woman staring back at me now. Sometimes, late at night, I'd still hear echoes of the past. Laughter that had turned to lies, dreams that had once felt stolen, but they no longer haunted me. They reminded me of how far I'd climbed. Pain had been my teacher. Silence had been my weapon. Truth had been my victory, and peace. Peace was my reward. As I turned off the lights, I glanced once more at the wall of framed sketches behind me, the timeline of my life in fabric and thread. The last one, unfinished, waited patiently for color. I smiled and picked up my pencil. Time to begin again. I used to think revenge was the end of the story, that after the fire there would be nothing left but smoke and silence. But I was wrong. Sometimes the end is actually a beginning, softer, steadier, truer. Months after the whirlwind of success, scandal, and revelation, life had finally found its balance again. I woke up one crisp morning in my New York apartment, the city hummed faint in the distance. The sun poured through the curtains, painting everything in a quiet gold. For once, I didn't rush anywhere. I didn't need to. The kettle whistled as I poured myself tea, standing by the window. The skyline shimmered, each building like a reflection of how far I'd climbed. And yet I wasn't thinking about fame or money. I was thinking about peace, Peace had been the real victory. After everything, Tessa, the betrayal, the heartbreak, I'd learned that success built on anger burns fast. But success built on purpose lasts. That morning, I opened the envelope from my publisher. Inside was the first printed copy of my memoir, Threads of Fire. On the cover, a photo of me smiling in my studio, hands stained with fabric dye. The tagline read, "How I stitched my pain into power." My heart swelled. Not out of pride, but out of gratitude. I sat on the couch, running my fingers across the embossed title, whispering, "You did it, Ayra. You really did." The book launch was held 2 weeks later at a cozy art space in Soho. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers who'd followed my story filled the room. John stood beside me, helping with the setup, grinning as always. "You realize this is full circle, right?" he said, handing me a microphone. "Full circle?" I echoed, adjusting my jacket. "You started this journey creating beauty out of betrayal," he said. "Now you're teaching others how to do the same." I smiled softly. Maybe that was the point all along. When it was time to speak, I walked up to the small stage. The lights were warm, the faces kind. For once, I wasn't trembling. "I am Ayra Danny, 31 years old," I began, echoing the introduction that had once started my pain. "And this is the story of how I lost everything and found myself." A quiet hush filled the room. "I used to believe that the people who hurt me had power over me," I continued, "but they only had the power I gave them. When I took it back, everything changed. Not overnight, not easily, but completely." I paused, scanning the audience. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The audience laughed softly. The line that once opened my pain now sounded almost poetic. After the reading, people lined up for autographs. Some thanked me, others cried quietly, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and resilience. Each face reminded me why I'd chosen to rise instead of sink. One woman, probably in her 50s, held my hand and whispered, "You made me believe it's not too late to start again." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "It never is." That night, as the event wound down, John and I walked out into the city. The streets glowed under streetlights, soft rain misting the air. He looked over at me. "So, what's next for Ayra Danny?" I laughed. "For once, I don't know, and I think that's okay," he smiled. "You've come a long way from that girl sketching in a tiny apartment." I nodded. "Yeah, but she's still in there. She just believes in herself now." Weeks later, I returned to the ocean one more time. The same stretch of shore where I'd once cried, cursed, and promised myself I'd rise. The sky was streaked with orange and lavender. I kicked off my shoes and stepped into the surf, the cold water curling around my toes. The tide whispered like an old friend, gentle and forgiving. I thought about Tessa, not with anger, but with understanding. I hoped she'd found her peace too, because no one stays a villain forever. Sometimes we all just lose ourselves trying to be seen, I whispered into the wind. "I forgive you." And with that, something inside me, something heavy and lingering, finally lifted. As I stood there, the waves rolling against my feet, I thought about everything I'd learned. That revenge doesn't heal. Growth does. That silence can be strength. That love, for yourself, for others, for the craft you live for, is the only legacy worth leaving behind. I smiled, looking out at the horizon. The world was wide again, and this time, it was mine. Weeks later, I received one last letter from Harper and Vale. They wanted to feature me, not as a comeback story, but as a mentor to young creators. The headline proposal made me laugh through tears. From broken threads to golden seams. The woman who sewed herself whole. Maybe that's what I'd always been doing, sewing myself whole. Now, when I look back, I don't see the betrayal as the worst thing that happened to me. I see it as the turning point, because without it, I never would have learned how strong I really was. I once believed that losing people meant losing love, But now I know. The love that stays, even when the world falls apart, is the love you give yourself. And as I write this final line, I want to say something to anyone watching, anyone who's been there, hurt, doubted, dismissed, or betrayed. Your story isn't over just because someone tried to write your ending. You hold the pen now. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, the people who doubt you become the reason you finally rise. What would you do if the person who broke you tried to come back once you've built everything without them?